The rain fell steadily on the Swedish military training facility, turning the sandy ground into a muddy arena. In the center of the ring, a woman knelt in the wet earth, her blonde hair plastered to her face, tears mixing with rainwater as they streamed down her cheeks. Captain Maja Lindström of Sweden's Special Operations Group, normally so composed, so confident, was on her knees, trembling. Her hands covered her face as sobs shook her shoulders. Standing before her was a shorter American soldier, his green beret barely visible beneath his rain-soaked cap. His expression held no triumph, only a quiet sadness that seemed to weigh on him. Around them, dozens of international soldiers stood in stunned silence. The Norwegian instructor who'd been overseeing the challenge had his arms crossed, shaking his head slowly. A German KSK operator whispered to his French counterpart. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The American extended his hand toward Maja, but she couldn't take it. Not yet. The shame was too overwhelming. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." How had it come to this? How had Sweden's rising star, graceful, skilled, and proud, ended up broken in the mud before a man she'd spent 2 weeks dismissing as just another quiet American? It all started 14 days ago when the joint Nordic-American training exercise began in the forests of central Sweden. The joint tactical training facility outside Karlsborg, Sweden was alive with the organized chaos of international military cooperation. Swedish SOG operators trained alongside American Green Berets, Norwegian FSK, Danish Jager Corps, and Finnish Special Forces. The purpose was clear: strengthen Nordic-American tactical partnerships and shared combat expertise. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes arrived on a cold October morning, his standard-issue duffel bag slung over one shoulder. At 5'8", with a compact, wiry build, he looked unremarkable among the towering Scandinavian soldiers. His brown hair was regulation short. His face carried the quiet lines of someone who'd seen too much, and his hazel eyes rarely met anyone's gaze directly. He moved through the camp with practiced efficiency, speaking only when necessary, his voice soft and his Midwestern accent gentle. Daniel was 31 years old, from a small town in rural Ohio, and he'd been with the Green Berets for 8 years. His specialty was combat medicine and close-quarters combat, though most people wouldn't guess it from his demeanor. He had a habit of keeping to himself, reading medical journals in his downtime and maintaining his equipment with almost meditative focus. The other soldiers barely noticed him. Captain Maja Lindström, on the other hand, was impossible to ignore. At 29, she was Sweden's SOG rising talent, a skilled operator with a growing reputation across European special forces. Standing 5'10", she carried herself with the natural grace of someone who trained in both ballet and combat from childhood. Her athletic frame was feminine yet strong, her movements fluid and purposeful. Blonde hair usually pulled back in a practical braid, sharp blue eyes that assessed everything, and features that were distinctly Scandinavian. High cheekbones, fair skin, a face that commanded respect without harshness. Maja was confident, articulate, and proud of her unit's reputation. She believed deeply in equality and professionalism, and she'd proven herself in operations across the Middle East and Africa. But she also had a streak of national pride that sometimes edged into arrogance, particularly when it came to American military culture. Their first encounter was unremarkable. Daniel was organizing his medical kit outside his barracks when Maja walked past with 2 Norwegian colleagues. She glanced at him briefly, noted his size, and continued her conversation in Swedish without acknowledgement. Just another American, her expression seemed to say, nothing special. The dismissal started subtly, as these things often do. During the first week's joint tactical exercises, Maja found herself partnered with various soldiers for different scenarios. When she was paired with Daniel for a medical evacuation drill, her disappointment was barely concealed. "You're the medic?" she asked in perfect English, her tone suggesting she'd expected someone bigger. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied quietly, already checking his aid bag. "Interesting," was all she said, but her skepticism hung in the air. The drill required them to extract a simulated casualty from hostile territory, a 200-pound dummy that needed to be carried 3 kilometers through rough terrain. Maja watched as Daniel approached the task methodically, using proper lifting techniques and a fireman's carry that distributed weight efficiently. He completed the course in respectable time, breathing hard but steady. "Not bad," Maja admitted to a Finnish operator later, "for his size." The backhanded compliment became her pattern. During hand-to-hand combat demonstrations, she'd make observations about American soldiers being more Hollywood than practical. During breaks, she discussed with European colleagues how Swedish and Norwegian special forces had more rigorous selection processes. Never directly insulting, but always comparing, always finding her own military culture superior. Daniel heard some of it. He never responded. By the second week, Maja's confidence had grown into something sharper. During a mixed unit briefing on close-quarters combat techniques, she openly questioned the American approach. "With respect," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "the American military focuses too much on overwhelming force and not enough on precision. In SOG, we emphasize control and efficiency." A few European soldiers nodded in agreement. The Americans shifted uncomfortably. Daniel, sitting in the back row, simply took notes. The turning point came during a joint training session on survival combat. Soldiers from each nation were demonstrating their hand-to-hand techniques. When it was Daniel's turn, he moved through the standard Green Beret combatives efficiently. Nothing flashy, just textbook execution. Maja watched from the edge of the mat, arms crossed. When he finished, she stepped forward. "Functional," she said, her tone almost patronizing, "but lacks adaptability. May I demonstrate the Swedish approach?" Without waiting for permission, she stepped onto the mat and executed a series of movements that blended multiple martial arts, fluid, graceful, technically perfect. The watching soldiers murmured appreciation. She was genuinely skilled. "You see," she explained, slightly breathless, "it's not about size or strength. It's about technique, leverage, understanding your opponent's psychology." Her eyes flicked to Daniel, something that requires actual combat experience, not just training. The implication was clear. She doubted his field experience. A Norwegian instructor cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the tension. "Captain Lindström, Staff Sergeant Hayes has extensive— I'm sure he's very qualified," Maja interrupted smoothly, "for American standards." Daniel finally looked up from where he'd been retying his boots. His gaze met hers for just a moment, calm, measuring, revealing nothing, before he looked away and stood to leave the training area. Maja interpreted his silence as inability to defend himself. She turned to her Swedish colleagues with a small, satisfied smile. She had no idea what she just provoked. That evening, after watching Daniel eat dinner alone for the 10th time, reading a worn paperback about battlefield medicine, Maja made her decision. The next morning, in front of the assembled international group, she issued her challenge. The morning briefing had just concluded when Maja stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "I'd like to propose a friendly challenge," she announced, "to foster international cooperation and mutual respect." The gathered soldiers turned their attention to her. Daniel, standing near the back, looked up from his coffee. Maya's eyes found him across the crowd. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, I've noticed you train alone quite often. I'd like to invite you to a combat skills challenge, hand-to-hand, mixed techniques, traditional military competition format." The crowd stirred with interest. A few American soldiers glanced at Daniel with concern. The Scandinavians looked intrigued. "And to make it meaningful," Maja continued, her voice taking on a formal quality, "if you win, I will personally award you the SOG for Schwarz Medallion, our unit's special commendation medal. It's a rare honor, given only to those who demonstrate exceptional skill and character. Very few outside our unit have received it." The murmurs grew louder. The Swedish Defense Medal was indeed prestigious, a symbol of respect within Nordic military circles, something that carried real weight. "It would look very distinguished on your uniform," Maja added, and though her words were respectful, there was an underlying confidence in her voice. She clearly didn't expect to lose. Several soldiers chuckled. A Danish operator muttered something about American collection of foreign medals. Daniel stood quietly for a long moment, his coffee cup still in his hands. The facility fell silent, waiting. Finally, he set down his cup and walked forward through the crowd. Soldiers parted for him. When he reached Maja, he had to look up slightly to meet her eyes.
"I accept your challenge, Captain," he said softly, his voice carrying despite its quiet tone. "Under one condition." Maja raised her eyebrow, amused. "And what would that be?" "If I win," Daniel continued, his expression unchanged, "you'll apologize. Publicly. To all the American soldiers here, for 2 weeks of dismissive comments and assumptions based on appearance rather than capability." The crowd went completely silent. Maya's smile faltered for just a second before returning. "That's quite confident, Staff Sergeant, but very well. I accept your terms." She extended her hand. "Tomorrow morning, the training ring. Full witness. May the best soldier win." Daniel shook her hand once, firmly, then turned away without another word. As he left, a British SAS liaison leaned toward a Norwegian instructor and whispered, "Does she know who that is?" The Norwegian shook his head slowly. "I don't think anyone's told her." Maja, overhearing fragments of the exchange, felt the first small seed of doubt. But she pushed it aside. She'd trained for this her entire life. She'd competed internationally. She'd proven herself in actual combat zones. How dangerous could one quiet American medic really be? The next morning arrived cold and gray, typical October weather for central Sweden. The training ring had been prepared, a 20-meter circle marked in the sand, surrounded by safety mats. Soldiers from all 6 nations gathered around, forming a dense crowd of witnesses. Maja arrived in her SOG training uniform, blonde braid tight, expression focused. She moved through warm-up stretches with practiced ease, high kicks, rotation exercises, shadowboxing combinations that showcased her technical training. She looked every inch the skilled operator she was. Daniel appeared 5 minutes later, dressed simply in standard Army PT gear. His warm-up was minimal, basic stretches, a few deep breaths, gentle shoulder rolls. He looked calm, almost meditative. The Norwegian senior instructor, Major Eriksson, stepped into the ring to explain the rules. Standard military combat sport format. 3 5-minute rounds, submission, knockout, or points. Maintain respect and control. Understood? Both nodded. Begin. Maja moved first, circling right with the fluid footwork of someone trained in multiple disciplines. Daniel pivoted slowly, staying centered, his hands loose at his sides, not quite a guard position, just relaxed readiness. "You can put your hands up," Maja said, almost kindly. "I won't judge you for being defensive." Daniel didn't respond. Maja tested him with a quick jab, not meant to land, just gauging reaction speed. Daniel slipped it with minimal movement, his head shifting just enough to let the punch pass. Interesting, Maja thought. Quick reflexes. She tried a combination, jab, cross, leg kick, all textbook striking. Daniel evaded the punches with economical head movement and checked the kick effortlessly, his shin meeting hers with surprising solidity for someone his size. The crowd murmured. He was faster than he looked. Maja increased her pace, throwing more combinations, mixing levels, using angles. Her technique was genuinely excellent. She'd clearly trained in Muay Thai, boxing, and traditional martial arts. Several strikes came close, forcing Daniel to move more actively. But he still hadn't thrown a single offensive technique. "Fight back," Maja said, slightly breathless. "Or are American soldiers only good at defense?" A few European soldiers chuckled. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet enough that only Maja could hear him. "In my unit, we train against opponents much faster than this. I'm just getting your timing." Maya's eyes narrowed. Was that confidence or delusion? She decided to test his grappling, shooting for a takedown with proper technique, level change, penetration step, strong grip. It should have worked. Daniel was smaller, lighter. Instead, he sprawled perfectly, his hips shooting back, his weight distributed to stuff the attempt completely. Before Maja could reset, he'd moved to her side, off-balancing her with a subtle sweep that sent her stumbling. He didn't follow up, just reset to center. The crowd's energy shifted. The Americans were leaning forward now. The Scandinavians were confused. Maja felt the first flutter of real concern. His defense was too good, too practiced, too calm. She attacked with renewed intensity, throwing everything she'd learned, mixing striking and grappling, using her reach advantage, her technical training. For 90 seconds, it was a beautiful display of skill. And Daniel evaded it all. Not by scrambling or luck, with precise, minimal movements that suggested he knew exactly where she'd strike before she threw it. Like he'd seen this 1,000 times before. Like he'd fought people far more dangerous than her. The rain that had threatened all morning finally began to fall, light drops at first, then steadily harder. The sandy ground started turning to mud. Maja reset, breathing harder now, sweat mixing with rainwater. "You're better than you look," she admitted. Daniel met her eyes, for the first time since the match began. "So are you, Captain." Then he smiled, small, respectful, but with something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. "Now it's my turn," he said quietly.
What happened next would be analyzed by those soldiers for years afterward. Daniel moved forward with sudden, explosive speed that seemed impossible from his previous calm demeanor. His striking was completely different now, precise, powerful, technically perfect. He threw a combination that blended Muay Thai, boxing, and military combatives so seamlessly it was impossible to distinguish where one ended and another began. Maja barely got her guard up in time. The impact drove her back 3 steps. She tried to create distance, but Daniel closed it instantly, his footwork now aggressive and calculated. He threw a low kick that buckled her lead leg, followed by a perfectly timed straight punch that she slipped by inches. This wasn't the quiet medic anymore. This was someone who'd trained to end fights quickly. Maja attempted a clinch, trying to use her Muay Thai experience, but Daniel controlled the position immediately. His grips were strong, his balance unshakable, his technique suggesting years of high-level grappling. He swept her legs out with a move that was part judo, part wrestling, part something else entirely. She hit the muddy ground hard, breath knocked from her lungs. Before she could process what had happened, Daniel had transitioned to a submission position, not aggressive, not brutal, just technically perfect control. His arm wrapped around her neck in a textbook rear naked choke, the pressure increasing gradually. "Tap or sleeve, Captain," he said quietly, no ego in his voice. "Your choice." Maja had no choice. She tapped 3 times. Daniel released immediately and helped her to a sitting position, checking her neck with professional concern. "You okay? Breathing all right?" She nodded, too stunned to speak, mud covering half her face. The match had lasted less than 1 minute once Daniel decided to engage. The crowd stood in absolute silence. Several soldiers had their mouths open. The Norwegian instructor looked like he'd witnessed something impossible. Maja sat in the mud staring up at Daniel as rain poured down on both of them. How did you do that?" Daniel extended his hand to help her up. "Captain Lindström, I'm not just a medic. I'm a Green Beret Special Forces medical sergeant. We're required to master combat skills to the same level as our direct action counterparts. Hand-to-hand combat, weapons, tactics, it's all part of the qualification." He pulled her to her feet gently. "I've also spent 8 years training with some of the best fighters in the world. Delta operators, SEALs, Marine Raiders, and yes, even your European Special Forces friends during past exchanges." Maja wiped mud from her face, her mind reeling. "But you were so quiet. You never said anything when I know," Daniel said simply. "I heard everything. I just don't see the point in defending myself with words when actions speak louder." A German KSK operator started clapping slowly. Then another soldier joined. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding, not mocking, but genuinely impressed. But Daniel raised his hand, and the applause died down. His expression had changed, still calm, but now with something heavier in it. "There's something else you should know, Captain." Daniel took a breath and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "My full designation is Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes, United States Army Special Forces, Operational Detachment Alpha 532, specialized in combat medicine and direct action. In 2021, I deployed to Afghanistan as part of a joint NATO task force supporting special operations across the region." Several soldiers in the crowd straightened, recognition beginning to dawn. On August 14, 2021, during the Kabul evacuation operations, Daniel continued, his voice steady but carrying the weight of memory. "My team was assigned to assist in the extraction of Allied military personnel and civilians. We were working with Norwegian, German, and Swedish assets who were trapped when the airport perimeter was compromised.
Maya's face had gone pale. She knew this story. Every Scandinavian soldier knew this story. There was a Swedish SOG fire team, Daniel said, looking directly at Maja now, pinned down by hostile fire near one of the evacuation checkpoints. 4 operators. They've been providing security for civilian evacuations when they were surrounded. Taliban fighters, roughly 30 combatants, and they had the Swedes cut off from friendly lines. The Norwegian instructor, Major Eriksson, stepped forward. "Holy God," he whispered, "you're the silent guardian." The crowd erupted in whispers. That call sign was legendary among NATO's special forces. The story had spread through military channels like wildfire. Daniel continued, ignoring the commotion. "I was running medical support when the call came in. My team was 2 kilometers away. By the time we could organize a full rescue, those 4 operators would have been dead." He paused, rain streaming down his face. "So, I went alone." You went alone?" Maja whispered, her voice breaking. "I had a radio, my rifle, and my medical kit," Daniel said simply. "I moved through the compound areas using cover, eliminated 7 enemy combatants who were flanking the Swedish position, called in air support to suppress the main enemy force, and reached the fire team's location. 2 of them were wounded, 1 critically. I provided emergency medical treatment under fire, stabilized them, and helped them fight their way back to friendly lines while carrying the most severely wounded operator on my back." He looked at Maja with something like sadness in his eyes. All 4 of those Swedish SOG operators survived. They were medevaced out within 20 minutes of reaching safety. The one I carried, the most critically wounded, spent 3 months in recovery but made a full return to duty. Major Eriksson had his phone out, pulling up something. He showed the screen to Maja. It was a military commendation report, complete with photos. There, in grainy combat footage, was a younger Daniel, mud-covered and exhausted, helping wounded Swedish soldiers toward a helicopter. The timestamp read, August 14th, 2021, Kabul. Maya's hands trembled as she stared at the photo. "They gave you a medal," she whispered. "The Swedes, we gave you the Försvarsmaktens medaling. The Swedish Armed Forces Medal of Merit, one of our highest honors for foreign soldiers." "I have it at home," Daniel said quietly, "on my dresser. I look at it sometimes and remember those 4 operators fighting like hell to stay alive. They were incredibly brave." Maya's legs felt weak. She had just spent 2 weeks mocking a man her own country had honored as a hero, a man who'd risked his life to save her fellow soldiers. But Daniel wasn't finished.
"Captain Lindström," Daniel said, his voice gentler now. "One of those 4 operators they pulled out that day, her name was Lieutenant Emma Bjorkman. She'd taken shrapnel to her leg and had severe blood loss. She was the one I carried." Maya's entire world stopped. "Emma?" she whispered, tears immediately filling her eyes. "Emma Bjorkman? My best friend since military academy?" Daniel nodded slowly. "She talked about you. While I was stabilizing her, trying to keep her conscious, she kept saying she couldn't die because her best friend was getting promoted, and she'd promised to be there for the ceremony. She said you 2 had been inseparable since you were 18. Maya's knees gave out. She sank into the mud, both hands covering her face as sobs broke free. Oh God, no." Daniel knelt beside her, his voice soft. "Emma is one of the toughest soldiers I've ever met. She never stopped fighting. When I told her to stay with me, to keep talking, she told me stories about you 2, about training together, about stupid pranks you pulled on instructors, about how you'd promised each other you'd make it to the top of SOG together." Maja was openly crying now, her shoulders shaking. The rain poured down, but she didn't notice. The crowd of soldiers stood frozen, many of them with tears in their own eyes. "I didn't know," Maja choked out. "Emma never told me your name. She just said, 'An American medic saved us.' I didn't know it was you. I didn't know." "She wanted to thank you in person," Daniel said gently. "When she recovered, she tried to find me, but I'd already been reassigned. Our paths never crossed again." Maja looked up at him, mascara and mud and tears streaking her face. "I mocked you. I dismissed you. I called you Hollywood, questioned your experience, treated you like you were beneath me. And you're the reason my best friend is alive. You're the reason I still have her." Her voice rose, raw with emotion. "I spent 2 weeks insulting the man who gave me back the person I love most in this world." Daniel extended his hand to help her up, but she couldn't take it.
Not yet. The weight of her actions was too crushing. "How do you not hate me?" she whispered. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I understand. You're a skilled soldier, Captain. You've earned your rank and your reputation through hard work. Sometimes that pride can make us forget to look deeper before we judge. I'm guilty of it too sometimes." He paused, then added, "Emma told me that day, while I was treating her wound, she said, 'My best friend always tells me the strongest warriors are the ones who stay humble.' I think she was talking about you."
Maja finally stood, with Daniel's help. She wiped her face, took a shaky breath, and turned to face the assembled crowd of soldiers. Her voice was hoarse, but clear. "I need to say something," she began, to Staff Sergeant Hayes and to all of the American soldiers present. She stood at attention, military bearing returning despite her emotional state. "I apologize, fully and completely. For 2 weeks, I let arrogance and assumptions guide my behavior. I judged soldiers by their appearance, their demeanor, their nationality, instead of their character and their actions." Her voice grew stronger. "Staff Sergeant Hayes is not just a skilled operator. He's a hero. He risked his life to save Swedish soldiers he'd never met, with no expectation of recognition or reward. And when I spent days disrespecting him, he responded not with anger, but with patience and professionalism." She turned to Daniel specifically. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm sorry. I'm deeply, truly sorry." Daniel nodded once. "Apology accepted, Captain." "I also want to apologize to all American soldiers here," Maja continued, addressing the group. "My comments about your military, your training, your capabilities, they were unfair, uninformed, and disrespectful. You serve with honor, and I fail to recognize that." Major Erickson stepped forward. "Captain Lindström, your integrity in this moment speaks well of you. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we address them." Maja reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was the SOG Försvars medallion, the Swedish defense medal she'd promised. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, you won our challenge, but more importantly, you've already proven yourself worthy of this honor years ago in Kabul. It's fitting that you receive a second recognition from Swedish forces." She pinned the medal to his PT uniform with shaking hands. The crowd applauded, and this time, Daniel didn't stop them. "There's something else," Daniel said quietly. "I have Emma's contact information. She's stationed in Stockholm now, fully recovered, back to full duty. I think she'd love to hear from you. And maybe the three of us could meet sometime, have coffee, tell old stories." Maya's tears started again, but this time they were different. Relief, gratitude, hope. "I'd like that, very much." Daniel smiled, a real, warm smile that transformed his face. "Good, because she made me promise back in Kabul that if I ever met her best friend Maja, I should tell her that Emma is proud of her, even when you're being stubborn." Maja laughed through her tears, a sound of pure emotion. "That sounds like Emma." Over the next few days, the dynamic in the training facility shifted completely. Maja became one of Daniel's closest training partners, learning from him while sharing her own expertise. She introduced him to the Swedish and Norwegian teams properly, with full respect. The American soldiers were welcomed into tactical discussions that had previously excluded them. On the final day of the exercise, during the closing ceremony, Maja gave a speech about humility, misjudgment, and the universal bonds between warriors. She spoke about how true strength isn't just physical or technical. It's about character, sacrifice, and seeing the worth in others even when they don't demand recognition. Daniel stood in the back, as always, quietly listening. But this time, when Maja caught his eye, she saluted him, and he returned it with a small nod of respect. 2 weeks later, in a cafe in Stockholm, Daniel met with Maja and Emma for the first time since Kabul. Emma hugged him tightly, calling him her guardian angel. Maja apologized, again, and he told her, again, that it was forgiven. They stayed friends. Every year on August 14th, the three of them would meet somewhere in the world, rotating between Sweden, Norway, and the United States, to remember the day that connected them forever.
So let me ask you something. Have you ever underestimated someone because of how they looked?
because they were quiet or small or didn't fit your idea of what strong should be. Maybe you dismissed someone who turned out to be extraordinary. Or maybe you've been that person, underestimated, overlooked, judged before you had a chance to prove yourself. This is Daniel Hayes' story and Maja Lindström's story. But really, it's a story about all of us, about the assumptions we make and the lessons we learn when we're brave enough to admit we were wrong. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that real warriors earn respect through actions, not appearances, leave a comment. Tell me about a time you misjudged someone or someone misjudged you. Hit that like button if you believe that true strength comes in many forms and that the quietest person in the room might just be the most capable. Welcome to Hidden Hearth, where we share stories about quiet strength over loud arrogance, humility over pride, and the warriors who prove that character matters more than appearance. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories of underdogs, heroes, and the soldiers who teach us that judgment should be earned, not assumed. Remember, the most dangerous warrior is often the one you underestimate, and the strongest person might be the one who says the least. Until next time, stay humble, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.